Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the restart of the NAFI Chairman's webinars. Appreciate everybody being here. Tonight's special guest is Nate Weinsaft, somebody I consider to be a friend that I met up at Oshkosh a couple of years ago, and is a good friend of NAFI's. Before we get started, just a couple of ground rules. I have just about everybody muted on the call. I'll unmute folks. I don't like leaving people muted, but I'm going to ask you to be your own police, so to speak. That is, excuse me. That is, mute yourself if you're not speaking. So before we get started, good evening, Nate. How are you?
I am doing absolutely fantastic, and hopefully I'm not muted.
No, you are not muted. You are here. So Nate's Nate calls himself a current. Let me try that again. Nate calls himself a student pilot who happens to hold a CFII and MEI over 2,700 hours. He first flew in instruments at the age of 6 when his dad had him fly the left seat in the Piper Cherokee, and he was on instruments but he couldn't see beyond the instrument panel. In high school, he worked on several home-built aircraft and earned his private pilot certificate at Johnson County Executive near Kansas City. He's been teaching part-time since 2001 with the East Coast Aero Club located in the Boston area. He's worked with local therapists. He's provided tailored flights for more than a dozen patients and their therapists. I'll have to ask about that. I assume that's for fear of flight type issues, Nate?
You know, it was pretty interesting stuff because it was Boston University has a Center for Anxiety and Other Disorders, and in some cases they actually use the airplane to induce anxiety in people who didn't even have a fear of flying. They had they were using it to teach them how to basically work through the anxiety using the therapy technique that they've developed. I remember one gentleman in particular, he wanted to treat it like a flying lesson. He was having a great time, and the therapist asked me to actually do some more, you know, I wouldn't say extreme, but just maneuver some more to try to induce some fear in this guy because he was having such a great time.
That sounds like a great subject for another webinar. How CFIs can do other stuff outside the box.
Happy to do it.
All right.
Sure, absolutely.
And outside of aviation, Nate has over 30 years working as a software sales engineer. So, Nate, I'm going to turn the screen over to you. And without much further ado, as they used to say in radio days, take it away, Nate.
Take it away. All right. So I just want to confirm you can see me and hear me.
Both confirmed.
Excellent. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you for the very kind words, Bob. I sure do appreciate it. And I have to start by commenting that I did grow up in an aviation family, and this is just a huge honor for me to present to you guys. First, that you're taking your Wednesday evening to spend some time to listen, but also as a kid growing up in Kansas City, the people that I respected the most, my heroes, I knew lots of pilots, but it was the flight instructors that I really thought were great. So it is a pretty big honor for me to do this. You know, I'm gonna start tonight by talking actually not about flying, but I'm going to talk about my doctor. I love my doctor, and it's not because she's cured me from some horrible disease. It's actually because she takes the time to listen to me. I go in for my physicals, and she listens, and as a consequence, she gets the full picture of what's going on with my health, and as a consequence, I'm a pretty healthy guy, and I get to fly, you know, our Cirruses around and teach, and I'm awfully darn happy about that. But I know a lot of people are not that thrilled with their doctors or the healthcare system, and one of the things that I certainly have heard about is that the insurance companies are really squeezing physicians to try to see more patients in less time. and as a consequence, everybody feels kind of like they're in a line there, rushing through their healthcare. And as a flight instructor, I started to think about my business because, candidly, I know a lot of the folks in NAFI are full-time instructors. I'm not. I'm a part-time guy, and I love flying, but I also, I hate disappointing my students. I always want to try to see if I can get as many students as I can in a given weekend. And I started to think about, was I actually hurting the instruction that my students were getting by trying to do too much in too short of a period of time? And I really wanted to emulate my doctor, the way she spends so much time with me, and I know I appreciate that. So that was sort of the thought process that went into the creation of this session. And tonight, what I'm going to be presenting are basically these three topics. Why do we need to debrief, and is that really important? Beyond that, what happens when we don't? What happens when we start shortening our students, the time we're spending with our students on the ground? And then the last thing is, as Bob mentioned, I'm a big-time computer geek, and I sort of went beyond that and said, are there ways for automated web-based tools maybe, or iPad types of things that we as flight instructors can leverage? And I will mention that I did work with the guys at CloudAhoy. I was an early user of theirs, but tonight I'm going to be talking about multiple different types of tools that we can use as CFIs. My plan is to go for probably close to about 35 minutes, and then I'll stop. But if somebody has a super big question, I certainly don't mind pausing to address it right at the moment.
Okay, and let me jump in for just
Sure.
1 moment. Again, a reminder to everybody: please mute your mics. And if someone has a question, probably the easiest way to handle it during the presentation is go ahead and put it in the chat area, and we'll pick it up and read it off and go from there. There's a chat area in Start Meeting down at the bottom of your bottom of the widget that you downloaded, or you can jump in, but it's a little easier if you just do it as a chat.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bob, and I'll let you keep an eye on those because I don't have the chat window displayed right now. So let's jump right into it. Really, why should we care about that post-flight time? And like all good flight instructors with questions about aviation things, I turn to the FAA, to the Aviation Instructors Handbook. And this quote is not exactly ambiguous. They don't talk about debriefing per se, but they do talk an awful lot about giving students appraisals and assessing their performance. And the quote here, for anybody who doesn't see the screen, it just says, "No skill is more important to an instructor than the ability to continuously analyze, appraise, and judge a student's performance." So if this is the most important skill, according to the handbook, then I want to take it seriously. So I started to think about what would a typical flight of mine be. And this might be a little ambitious, but I think that, if you have, 2-hour block with a student, you certainly are going to take off. You're going to climb, maybe make sure they're doing it at best rate. You want to make sure they can level off. We'll do maybe some slow flight, some minimum controllable airspeed maneuvers. Of course, from there, you got to do the power off stalls. We'll do one turning and we'll do one straight. We're doing stalls. We might as well do some departure stalls as well. Thinking we want to get down, we'll kill the engine or simulate killing the engine on the student. We'll let them glide down a little bit, and once we get a little lower altitude from there, maybe some ground reference maneuvers, and back to landing. So that's 9 maneuvers, or 10, I guess, if you count the landings. And for each one of those, according to the FAA, we should provide some sort of an assessment. And when we look at what the criteria, again, going back to the Aviation Instructors Handbook, an assessment needs to meet this criteria. You know, we need to, clearly we need to be objective. We want to make sure that we're being fair, and that the student has to feel like we're treating them fairly. When we're doing this assessment, being flexible, I think when I think about that also, I consider where they are in their student training and what their experience has been. We want to be comprehensive, A to Z. We want to be constructive. We don't want them to just hear about negative things. It also has to be specific, and for me, it's very important that I think back about the flight instruction I've gotten over my life, and the best has been the instruction where I hear something very, very exact about what I did, and I can take that information, and there's a pretty strong recommendation of how I can improve it. Some of the worst assessments I've gotten were things like, yeah, that was pretty good, or gosh, that wasn't so good. And, you know, you really can't take that and improve your flying. So it's a pretty important list, and it's pretty. I think most instructors certainly try to abide by it when they are giving their critiques. And then the Aviation Instructor Handbook goes on to talk about collaborative assessments, and that I found to be tremendously helpful in that I wanted to give the student a chance to evaluate their own performance for lots of reasons. One of them is if they don't know what the thing is supposed to look like, they're probably not going to be able to come back and fly that maneuver. But I also, Bob and I were talking about this the other day. Golly, I've had times where a student did something and I was ready to, you know, just let them have it and tell them exactly how they missed the maneuver. But I had a moment, you know, stepped back from the maneuver and said, well, so what were you know, how did you want to fly that maneuver? And when I heard the rationale for what the student was doing, it made all the sense in the world to them how they were controlling the airplane. So these collaborative assessments are pretty cool. Now, if you look at this list of what an effective assessment is, I'm not sure we instructors have a whole lot of tools other than maybe a notepad while we're flying to record what's going on. The student, they may have their memory of what they did while they were flying, but of course they're busy flying. So for us to be able to communicate all that to the student, I feel like we kind of need two things. We need some time to be able to get it out, but we also need a receptive student. We don't want somebody telling us to talk to the hand. And it might not be an attitudinal thing. It may be a simple matter of the student's just busy flying the airplane, and they are not in a great place to be listening to that, you know, an assessment that is objective and complete and all that big long list. So I think, you know, from the Aviation Instructor Handbook, it doesn't seem like the airplane is a great place to be doing it, the assessment. But it goes on from there to talk about obstacles to learning. And each of these things I know we've all dealt with students, and while they all may manifest themselves in the airplane, I would argue that trying to resolve it in the airplane or discuss it or figuring out what the student's really going through while we're flying is, in most cases, just doesn't work. And again, Bob mentioned my time working with fear of flying folks and their therapists. And there's a whole lot that goes on before we get in the airplane, and there's a significant amount of time that we talk about it afterwards. But while we're flying, you know, actually the therapist is having a detailed conversation with the patient. I'm not having those kinds of conversations with my students while we're flying. They're busy kind of trying to control the airplane. So you know, you go through the list, and I think everybody would agree that we really need to be able to address most of these things while we're on the ground, being able to kind of work through you know, why does the student feel impatient? Gosh, that's another one where most of us have type A students. They really are trying to get through a course. They don't want to spend a lot of money. So I see that impatience all the time where, you know, people need to be patient with themselves and realize that it does take time to learn how to fly. So that, again, that conversation needs to happen for me on the ground. So while we're flying around, Martha's Vineyard trying to find the airport and get the airplane on the ground, I just, like I said, I just don't think this is the place where most of us want to engage in those conversations. So what does Flying Magazine say about all this? Well, they actually did a tip of the week back in 2013, and Pia made the comment that a lot of people do kind of feel like doing these debriefings may be a waste of time, but and she kind of goes on to talk about the importance of being able to do the debrief in a place where there aren't distractions. So for most of us, that's on the ground. At this point, I suspect there are a few of you guys and gals watching the webcast that are probably just saying, okay, you're duh. I mean, it's or as one of my college professors might say, it's intuitively obvious that a debrief is a good thing. But as Bob mentioned, I spent the last couple of years at Oshkosh working the CloudAhoy booth, and I got a chance to talk to an awful lot of pilots who walked by, and I started to ask them about what was preventing them from actually getting a debrief. And these are just kind of three of the things that stuck in my head. I'm sure if we jump into a discussion after my session, you guys may have others, but part of it is just motivation. Clearly people are spending the money and taking the time to learn to fly because they love flying. And doing ground time just isn't nearly as much fun. That's true for the students. It's also true for the instructors. The other thing that I heard quite a bit was that people just don't have time, that they have stuff going on outside of the aviation. So students, when they get done flying, they kind of want to get home and get on with their lives. Instructors, usually they've got another block of students that they want to fly with right afterwards. And then there's also this perception of money, that the flight schools, the students, and the instructors all kind of feel like their money's not as well used on the ground, or they're not going to make as much money if airplanes and the students aren't flying. So those are just a handful of reasons. I suspect people have others, but I think what I was trying to do is show that, at least from the FAA standpoint, there's a pretty clear and compelling reason why we should debrief. So given the fact that people have this choice, both the students and instructors, I started to think about, well, what's the impact of not spending that time with the student? And fortunately, AOPA did a study back in 2010. And the whole point of that study was to interview students, instructors, and flight schools. And what they were looking at was, what did everybody feel was a good experience? What was a bad experience? What were reasons for students not completing their training? And what were some of the ones who did, what were the things that were very high as far as factors that caused them to stay? And boy, I did a little bit of reading through the report. I didn't want to present the whole thing here tonight because I didn't want to put everybody to sleep. But this quote, to me, more than anything, really hit the tone, which is, it's really about how we interact with our students. And in this piece of the survey, they call out directly pre- and post-flight debriefings as an important piece of it. So if you looked at the whole report, and gosh, like I said, I'm not going to have you guys do that. They basically took the results of what people liked, what they didn't like, broke it up into these factors, and then it kind of bubbled down into what they called was the optimal flight training experience, or the model flight training. And I started looking at these results, and I said, well, how many of these relate to a post-flight or pre-flight experience? And you see the arrows on the right side here. An instructor effectiveness, they related directly to it. Value, did the students feel like they were getting the money that they were spending? Were they getting something out of it? But then these other two below, these kind of touched my geeky computer side. This need to feel like they were part of the community, recognition, and information sharing. I thought, well, from my computer and internet experience, that seemed to me like there were some nice tools out there that maybe we could leverage for that. So I've just taken 5 bullets, and again, it kind of draws in the same theme. So if we take this to the logical extension that flight instructors need to spend extra time with their students, that's going to lead to more students completing their lessons. Same thing with being able to review lessons before and after flights. People spending the last bullet in particular, covering material in flight that could be covered with less expensively on the ground. We take those bullets and we think about, well, if we meet the model, we have a better chance of keeping our students. If we don't use these model recommendations, it's not that everybody's going to, leave flying. It just says there's a higher chance that our students aren't going to be happy, that we're not going to retain them as students, and that's not good for aviation. So I'm going to take the last 10 minutes and kind of bubble it up into sort of what it all meant for me. Airplanes, I think we all agree, are terrible classrooms, but they're a great place to fly. I think we all probably also agree that the good instruction does require an accurate assessment, and it takes time with students on the ground to be able to do that, and it will improve their learning. And sort of that last bullet there is, it probably does hurt our retention in aviation when we don't spend the time. So from there, I just thought, okay, it's the right thing to do. My students will benefit from it, but what tools do we give flight instructors to be able to provide a flight debrief that meets the FAA's criteria of what it should be? So thinking back about the instructors I've had, I know I've had instructors that use their hands, they wave them around a bunch, and that was one form of a debrief. I had others that used their voice. Usually it was elevated to make a point, typically while I was flying an airplane. The third one there, I know that historically we've used sectional charts. We roll them up, and especially in tandem seat airplanes, they're very effective at thwacking students on the head and shoulders. Whiteboards, all of our flight schools generally have whiteboards and markers, but I think traditionally the markers are dried out. And of course, my favorite is the instructors who, the debrief consists of somebody who's entering a logbook entry and just telling them what the student flew as they did. I'm guilty of all of these things for my debriefs, but a little tongue-in-cheek. But I think these are kind of the traditional tools that we use for debrief. So I think about who are our new students, and they look a lot like this. And the educated folks who are coming into aviation, they are clearly fans of the portable tablets and phones, and they are clearly fans of social media. So when I think about what modern tools we want to use to do our debriefing, it would be really awesome if we could leverage all of these kinds of things. So kind of a quick assessment of, and this is by no means a complete, this isn't everything that's out there, but this is a sort of a sampling of what the industry has provided pilots and flight instructors to do debriefings. And some of the stuff is actually, it's fine. It's very cool. One of my students is a marathon runner, and he came to one of the lessons with kind of wired up. He wore the same heart monitor he uses when he does his road racing, and he sampled the data and pushed it up to this website. And there we are doing our traffic patterns at Hanscom Field, and down below, is just a fascinating plot. Hopefully everybody can see it pretty clearly. What you see on the white here is the student's heartbeat. And you see in orange, this orange line, that's his altitude. It's measured in meters, but it's altitude.
Hey, Mark,
and what you, I'm sorry, was there a question?
No, somebody had an open mic.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
So what you see, and it's actually pretty cool. As we got close to the ground with all of his touch and goes, his heartbeat would go up, and this guy right here, it was I think he said 161 beats per minute as he got close to the ground, and I I was fascinated by this. I mean, first, this guy's clearly got a very good heart if he can be running marathons. But second was, what could I do as his instructor to kind of calm this down? And in fact, we talked about it, and we were able to discuss some of his anxiety around landings, and when we got close to the ground, and I got a little more calm when we were doing the flights, and shortly after he did this plot, the student actually soloed. So again, not everybody's going to have this kind of thing, but it just shows that pretty much any non-aviation GPS is probably going to give you breadcrumbs or ground track of what the airplane's doing. I'm a pretty big fan of ForeFlight, and again, if you see over here, you can press the record button. You can record flights on ForeFlight and kind of just do a simple analysis on their website to see where you've been. And then the nice thing is that ForeFlight will export that data to other applications, one of which is CloudAhoy. But for just free stuff, if you just want to see where you went, this certainly is a decent thing to do. The guys at WingX have taken it, I think, to the next level, where they can record data. And in this case, instead of just seeing on Google Earth, you see the ground plot over a sectional. And down below, we've got a little plot here. We've got airspeed in green. We've got the altitude here in white. And we can look at the whole flight and see where the student went. We can also look at the data. I mean, it's certainly, again, it's sort of one step beyond just a simple ground track, and they have a play button so you can kind of see the airplane moving around that track. The next screenshot I have is just a 2D version of CloudAhoy, and the application will in its free version will give you the same kind of ground track that you saw before with WingX. You see some graphs over here on the left, but as a flight instructor, the stuff down below on the left, the segmentation, that's a big deal for me. And what I'll do for the next, I think probably about the next 5-10 minutes, is drop out of the PowerPoint and just give you guys a chance to see how I use CloudAhoy in my flight instruction, and hopefully. I should start by saying I'm not going to be doing a complete demonstration of every feature. That really was not my intent here. But just to give you other flight instructors sort of an appreciation of what I think the state of the art is in this technology when we do our instruction. So when I log in, and again, CloudAhoy, part of the reason why it's called CloudAhoy isn't because we're going through stratus layers or cumulus layers. The reason it's called CloudAhoy is because this product actually does sit up in the internet in the cloud, and it allows me to record flights. And instead of just seeing simple data, you'll see in a moment how it actually enhances the information to be able to provide the views that we see. Going back to the model recommendations about what we might want to do to be able to share our flight information with our friends and family, this product actually has direct integration with Facebook. So if I wanted to share this flight with everybody on Facebook, I just click like, and it's there. Or if I have students in my Aero Club that I regularly fly with, I can just share them directly in the server. Or using this link, I can also just email it. So that's a great feature that makes these things collaborative assessment possible. Because if you think about my students again, if we're only flying on the weekends, I can send a flight to my student, and they can spend the whole week thinking about how they flew in the last flight, and be able to pull that together. So I think one of my students is actually on the webcast tonight, Matt. Matt, I'm not going to do a full debrief, but Matt flew, this was the beginning of his long cross country, and Matt put this right up here on CloudAhoy as well. So I know as an instructor where my student went because I've got the data to view it. And even more important is if we wanted to be able to analyze a little bit and have a conversation about where he went. So the next flight I'm showing, this is exactly the same flight that you saw in the PowerPoint. I showed it in WingX, and now I'm showing it in CloudAhoy. And as I mentioned, we've got this segmentation. And what that means is that I go out and I fly, I capture the data, and literally as I walk into the club, as soon as my iPad is on the network, the data from our flight gets put up into the server, and all of this segmentation gets built out for me automatically. What that means for me is that I can analyze just one piece of the flight. So if we flew for 40 minutes or an hour or however long we flew, and I might say, I'd really like to look at these, this air work we did. These were steep turns. So I'm actually going to do 3 scenarios. I'm going to show some steep turns. This was a combination of VFR, IFR flight. So we did steep turns, we did some VOR tracking, and then we shot an ILS. So those are the 3 things I'm going to show here. And so very simply, I can just click on just those pieces of the flight, and I can take a look at altitude versus airspeed. Now, when I talked about seeing more than just the data that the GPS collects, you know that the GPS doesn't know anything about airspeed. It only knows about ground speed. So that's part of the magic of CloudAhoy and the calculations that it does. On top of that, it's even going to tell me what the wind vectors are. Again, a typical GPS is not going to just capture what the wind data is. So that's all coming through for us. And part of my analysis might be is sitting down with the student and saying, you had a little bit of variation here in altitude. At one point, at this point in the circle, you see they were down at 3,600 feet. And then as they get kind of tight and turn into steep turn, most people let the nose fall too much. Well, this particular student, they climbed almost 1,000 feet in that part of the turn. And then you notice as they shallow out the turn a little bit, they lose some of that altitude as they come back around. So we might be able to just use a tool like this to bring the student back into the airplane and ask them, what were you looking at? What were you thinking about at the time? And continue on with that maneuver. Also for ground tracking, excellent tool to be able to see what the wind is doing to you and so forth. So that's one of the scenarios that I would use CloudAhoy for. You can also turn on other pieces of data to be able to analyze that. The next piece that I was going to show is, as I mentioned, in this particular flight, we want to bring the student up and do some instrument work. And in this particular part, we actually are going to be doing some tracking against the Lawrence VOR. So far I've shown you guys what this stuff looks like against the Google Earth. But what I'm going to do is just change the view and show it against the IFR chart, so you see that you can see how close they came to the VOR, and that was pretty helpful. Now in this case, I can look at the altitude data, and sure there were some spikes up and down, but for the most part, this isn't the thing that is really interesting to the student. It's probably not that interesting to me. Those variations aren't enough that I really want to make a big deal about it. But what I really want to look at is how did they track the radials on the VOR. And the next feature I'm showing you, this is kind of a cool little feature that I haven't seen in a whole lot of tools. What I'm able to do is define a target, and I'm going to turn on the guide. And where we're going to go with all of this, I'll put this back in the satellite view so you can see it a little bit better. At this point, what I'm trying to figure out is how did the student fly the radials off of the VOR? And I can sort of get some idea. But if you look down here on the where my mouse is, you see it has DME distance to and from. And I can just step the student, I can step the airplane along the student's path. And you see that he's doing just a fabulous job of holding that 62 degrees. And then at this point in the flight, I asked the student, okay, you tracked outbound on the 60 degree radial. Why don't you now track out the 40 degree radial? And you see how they turn in the right direction, and they intercept it, and they track it outbound. So this guy just did a fabulous little job here doing exactly what I said. And then coming back the other way, you see how he tracked that same 60 degree radial in. And then we wanted to transition from there to say, well, let's fly the hold as published. And the first time he went around the hold, you see that he kind of went outbound a little bit too far. I was really happy that when he started to turn inbound, he didn't turn directly back into I think it was the 233. He actually kind of leveled off a little bit early, intercepted it inbound, and then you see the next hold, he did just a great job flying that. So that's an example of visualization of holds and how to use something like this. I've got one more demo scenario here for you guys. So, sorry for the. Hopefully it's not too boring watching somebody else's flying. Trust me, it's a lot of fun when you're looking at your own flying. So from here, what I'm going to do is, as I said, he flew an ILS, and I created, this is the one piece that I did that CloudAhoy didn't do for me. I created this custom segment. And what I'm going to do for here is I want to see, well, how did he fly this compared to the actual approach? And so for this guy, I'm going to turn on the localizer 29 in Bedford, and we'll add that on. And so what you see is, you see the waypoints, you see the missed approach procedure. You also see those white lines are going to be the white lines are going to be the localizer, the boundaries of the localizer. And to make this even more fun, I'm going to turn this into a 3D view. 3D view. I don't know if you guys remember Top Gun, but when the scene when Maverick's seeing his flight and they spin it around and Charlie's telling him how he flew that aggressive maneuver. Well, the 3D rendering actually gives me the same kind of tools here with my students. So I'm going to give it just a second. And you know it's live.
It always works that way, Nate.
I know. I'm not gonna stress about it too much. So essentially, what we're going to see when it does come back is the it's going to give us a 3D view, both so I can spin it in the third dimension. And I have created just a single segment. So instead of looking at the whole flight, again, I can look specifically at that approach. So that long base leg, you'll see that. And let's just come right back into it. There you go. Kind of like that. All right.
You know, it's like doing a perfect landing. Nobody's ever around, Nate. You know, it's just seems to be a rule.
No, this feels way more like a check ride to me than just a simple landing. Demonstrating this to my peers.
Well, you're doing very well, so you're doing fine.
Oh, well, thank you. I do appreciate it. All right. So now what we're looking at is the flight in the 3D mode. And again, I'm just going to, you see all of that data. What I'm just going to do is I'm just going to turn off these guys. And all I want to look at is just this one little piece. And again, I think that is just a huge, for me, I've just found it to be a huge value. So I can just really drill into one specific part of the flight. We can zoom in here a little bit.
While you're zooming in, your student did a nice job with the glide slope. I got to tell you that.
He sure did. It's important to not we certainly don't want to embarrass the students too much here. So what you're seeing is how I can spin this thing around, look at it in 3D. And I think, again, as an instructor, you realize that different students, when you visualize these things, different students are going to get something out of it using different visualizations. So for some folks, being able to spin something around and look at it in 3D, and then be able to kind of look at their flight path and see how that looked, that's going to be very, very helpful to them. So this is certainly one view, and I'll just zoom in on it just a little bit more so you guys can get an idea of what that looks like. But I'm sure there's some pilots here that are going, you know what, I have my GoPro camera, and my GoPro camera lets me see right out the window. That's really what I would want to see. And GoPros are pretty cool. I like them a lot. But when I watch the videos, I always say, you know, I'd love to see the instruments. I don't want to just see the horizon and hands moving around. What I'd really love to see is the actual flight. So with CloudAhoy, I can bring in a video. So if I've recorded something in GoPro, or if I've recorded the audio, this is what I've done with some of my students. I'll record the audio and upload that and be able to sync the audio of the lesson. But we also have this cockpit view, which is also pretty neat. And then I can also, in the cockpit view, turn on my glass cockpit. So at this point, and I can play the flight, and now you actually see the student flying that approach in. I'll speed it up a little bit so it doesn't take too much time. But I've got this plot on the left side, so I can kind of see what's going on with airspeed and altitude. And then I see them, I basically, other folks might want to just be able to see that glass cockpit view and see out the window. This is, you link this up with the audio, and you basically have your lesson. You have a complete digital record of what happened with the flight. So that's how I use CloudAhoy. I'm hoping if there are other folks on the phone who've used it, you know, maybe I pointed out a couple of tips that you might be able to take advantage of. Let me just get back to my deck here. So kind of two rhetorical questions I'll throw out to the group is can these electronic devices help us get more out of that ground time? And will they affect, you know, students' performance and retention? I think in the case of the military, they invest very heavily in the post-flight debriefs and the tools to record the flight and the performance. And I think that, you know, even from the simple breadcrumbs all the way up to something like CloudAhoy, it feels to me, at least in my training, I've certainly found these to be helpful. So just for grins, I want to come back and revisit the why not questions as well. So, you know, the first three are still true. You know, it's still more fun to fly than to sit on CloudAhoy or for flight and see my flight replay. But the last three I think are interesting. I'm not sure that general aviation has ever had a low-price tool to be able to go back and replay a flight. Does require computers. It does require a little bit of computer skills. So I think these are things that for folks that make the investment, I've heard very clearly from my students that they really appreciate it. And I will just share another way that I've leveraged this is when I do intro flights. Is I will record the flight, ask the student to give me their email address, so now I have a way of communicating with them, and I'll send them the flight. And again, that's been a very low-cost marketing tool that I've used. So there's me after probably one of the happiest days of my life, getting to fly with Mr. Sean D. Tucker out there at his school at King City. So from there, let me just open it up to any questions.
Well, I'll tee it up right off the bat. Not just as a question, but a statement. You mentioned audio recording. I've recorded myself on a lesson, or recorded myself and the student on a lesson using Lightspeed's tool, FlightLink. And I can't speak for the rest of you, but hearing yourself teach is an eye-opening experience. if you ever have a chance to do that, speaking about improving the quality of your instruction and improving your pilot's experience. It's not always fun to listen to yourself, but you learn a lot. I'll just leave it at that.
I recorded a flight recently when I was a student, and I was just utterly shocked at how much information I had missed, and being able to record it and how useful that was. But yeah, absolutely, as the teacher too. I think that's the only way you get better, right? Is by critiquing yourself and figuring out where you can improve things.
Absolutely. One question I do have, and then I'm just trying to plant some seeds here. I use Redbird. There's other simulators too. Again, these aren't commercials for products, but I have access to a Redbird FMX. And one of the things I've discovered with CloudAhoy is that if I kind of fib to CloudAhoy or ForeFlight and say it's a 172, it does a pretty good job of rendering what the student did in the sim too. That's also been a big help. And is that fairly straightforward, easy to do, or do you know of other products that do that?
So I have done. I'm an X-Plane fan. I often will bring students over to my house to do lessons in X-Plane. The integration is seamless to do that. WingX, when I got WingX, again, it was trivial to be able to make that look like it was on X-Plane and record the flight just like I was in the plane. On Redbird, I believe that there's work being done, and there might even be somebody on this webcast who could talk to it, but I believe that those guys are certainly working on making that a real thing with Redbird. But it sounds like you already got it to work.
Well, through their Cygnus application, the Bad Elf application. And
okay.
Yep.
And I use Bad Elf too.
Jay Brunn asks, and by the way, the mics are open. I only have one muted mic because somebody's giving me a lot of reverb. But Jay Brunn asks, on CloudAhoy, do you input all those flight segments? I mean, does the instructor have to sit there and bang all those in?
Well, so great question, because I probably didn't do a good enough job explaining it. That flight that I showed, that I did that whole demonstration on, all of those segments were automatically created except the last one. So the turns around the point, there were a bunch I didn't show. I did some slow flight. We did some stalls. We did some turning stalls. All of those segments were automatically captured by CloudAhoy, and part of the I call it magic, but I know it's not magic. It's software development. When you put your IN number into the capture program, the server goes to the FAA database. It knows what kind of airplane those IN numbers are, and then it uses the airplane numbers to be able to figure out what's a slow flight. So obviously, a slow flight in the Seminole is going to be real different than slow flight in my Citabria. And by the way, we have both of those airplanes at East Coast. So CloudAhoy will use that in doing the calculation. So no, the only segment that I manually put in was that last one for the ILS, just because I wanted to be able to break that out.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Van, I know you're on. You're always good for one or two.
No, I'm fine. Good presentation.
I think it was a great presentation myself.
Yeah, Daryl Dilley here. I missed the first half of it. I just caught it on the tail end, but it looks like you did a good job.
Daryl, it's recorded. I hope you'll catch the first half.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
we do.
You might send me something how to go back and look at the recording on it. So
it will be up on the NAFI website.
Okay.
Yeah, we put all these up on the NAFI website.
Very good.
Excellent.
Hi, I have a question. I hope this isn't off topic, or actually it is, but first of all, really enjoyed the lecture. I'm considering working on getting my initial CFI. Could anybody make a recommendation as far as a school or a good way of getting an initial CFI?
Where are you located?
I'm in the Baltimore, Maryland area.
Okay, well, I don't know Baltimore. I don't know the East Coast. I'll leave that to Nate. I will say this, and I'll get out of the way. Find yourself that gray-haired CFI, and by the way, it's gray-haired in attitude, not necessarily age or color of hair, but the guy who really wants to teach. Become his best friend. Buy him sandwiches, or her. Go out and learn and observe, and if you can ride along with somebody who's recognized as being a good instructor, ride along on a lesson. Get the student's permission and, within safety parameters of the aircraft, and do it. You will be amazed at what you learn. Yes, there's the book learning, and there's the school, and I'll get out of the way after I say this. You obviously hit something that's a passion of mine. But a big part of becoming a really good flight instructor is picking and choosing and finding what works for you from other instructors and developing your own style. I have about 20 different flight instructors living inside my head that I've stolen from. Everybody from Rod Machado and Barry Schiff and William Kirshner to the late Rick Holmbrecht, who you don't know because he was my CFI instructor. So I'm off my soapbox. Anybody else have any opinions on that?
That sounds like good advice.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is anyone familiar with the aviation academies at all? I believe American Flyers has an instructor academy, and I think there may be one or two out on the West Coast, perhaps. Yeah, I'm looking at a number of scenarios. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And again, just a wonderful webinar.
Great. And one thing I'll add, you don't have to be a CFI to become a member of NAFI. I hope you are a member.
Yes, I did join. I was out at Oshkosh this year, and
very good.
The gentleman said that I didn't have to join, and I didn't have to be a CFI. So
okay. Cody,
really great.
Cody or Kyle did a great job then.
Right.
Good for them. So that's really, because mentoring is really a big part of it. Somebody had something to say and I stepped on them. Steve says he attended Flight Safety International. Excuse me. Let me try that again. I attended Flight Safety International in Vero Beach. So there's any way you can do it. The 141 schools do a wonderful job. I, being a busy businessman at the time, did it a drop at a time and probably drove Uncle Rick out of his mind doing it part 61. But
wow.
At the end of the day, it got done.
Wow, that's great. Well,
Well,
thank
Bob,
you very much.
I guess I'll just make a comment to your comment. When you said you have the voices of 20 instructors in your head, I think that's what makes being a flight instructor so amazing, is that every student every student you'll ever get is going to need a different one of those 20 voices. I think flying more than anything else, there's so many different disciplines that you're teaching, and it touches people so differently, and each student kind of hears it differently and needs it. So, Bob, I'm sure, you probably use 5 or 6 different instructors' voices every time you're teaching.
I can tell you that I have one student currently. He's a top surgeon in the St. Louis area. He's working on his instrument. He's become a very good friend. And if you listen to me teach, you would say I'm breaking every rule in the FAA book, because I swear I'm borderline abusive with him. But he is, because of the rigors he went through to become a surgeon, he says that's what he needs from me. He needs me to be harsh. On the other hand, I have another student that if I tried that approach, gone. Both, he would check out and fire me, both. So it really depends on the person. I will add that eventually it becomes your own voice as an instructor. You will find your voice. Just be patient with yourself. I'll tell you, that first student, I swear every flight instructor ought to give the first student their private for free.
Yeah.
Because that poor first student gets to listen to you figure it out. So
Boy, that bring images back.
Doesn't it though? And don't be afraid to go lean on somebody. Don't be afraid to go lean on somebody. If you're running, if you bump into something, go ask. I will tell you that NAFI is about to put on a, and we've gotten way off topic here, but it all goes back to debrief. So this is a form of debrief, I suppose. And NAFI is getting ready to put on. We announced it at Oshkosh. Getting ready to put on a mentor program where we will put you together with an experienced flight instructor. And there's two components to it. One, we recognize that a lot of young people coming out of school are on their way to the airline business or corporate flying, and God bless them. But while they're here, they're instructing, and they need to become the best instructors they can be. They owe it to themselves and to aviation and their students. And the other piece is that for people like me who want to be career or semi-career instructors, everybody here knows I work for a major railroad, and I do this as something I love. Those mentors will be available for the same kinds of questions brand new instructors have. What do I do with this guy? I can't get this guy to land to save my life. What do I need to do different? You have a suggestion? That kind of thing.
Wow. That's awesome. That is really great to hear. NAFI sounds like quite an organization here.
Well, we try. And we try. And any volunteering that anybody, as was once said in Support Your Local Sheriff, we will not turn down any help that is cheerfully offered. So, anyway.
Thank you. Appreciate the help.
No problem. Anybody else have any comments or questions tonight? Nate, would you be willing? You brought up a lot of great stuff. Would you be willing to share your email address with everybody, or an email address that if anybody has any questions for you?
You know, that's a very gracious thing to ask. Sure, I can be reached at natew00 at comcast.net. And while I did work for the CloudAhoy guys during the Oshkosh to help them in their booth, I'm not an employee, but I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions about just the modern tools, how I use them, just how to get the most out of it, because I think there's a lot of hidden gems in there, and I just, I like helping folks if I can.
And that came through tonight. I'm going to close out by saying that I'm one of those flight instructors that is guilty of saying, great job, you heard what I had to say in the airplane. Well, I don't do it all the time, but I have been known to do it. Having a tool in front of you, and I've gone all the way back to using a 295 with breadcrumbs on there to show people what their S-turns look like. So I've been a believer in this technology. It is amazing how much having an objective record in front of the student helps. Not only with where did you go wrong, but as I like to point out to my students, why don't you tell me about the 10,532 things you did right while we were flying? Because they never remember that. They're ready for the when they hear critique, they hear the word criticism rather than praise. So all those things play together. All right. Well, we'll be doing this again the third Wednesday next month. I'm not going to say what it is yet because I'm waiting for an email confirmation. But for those of you that enjoyed these and sent me emails saying, when are you going to do them again? I apologize. This summer became very intense for both professional and personal reasons. Nothing bad. It was a very tough summer, and layered on top of that was a small air show in a small town in Wisconsin. So, so we're back, and we're committed to doing these every month. If anybody has any suggestions for topics or wants to pony up and do one themselves, get out there and show the world how to teach better, or your ideas on how to teach better, we'd love to have you. And thank you for everybody who didn't watch the debate on CNN tonight. And yeah, it was pointed out to me that I was competing directly with one of the most watched political debates in history. So having as many of you here for that is very gratifying. So with that, fly safe. Encourage your students to fly safely and well. Be good to each other, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.